Nobody expected things to spiral this fast. One post, one photo shoot, and suddenly the internet was screaming that Rihanna had finally walked away from A$AP Rocky. But what really happened behind the scenes is way more intense than anyone thought. It all started with a single upload. Rihanna dropped a series of bold, jaw-dropping lingerie photos that instantly took over social media. Timelines froze. Fans couldn't look away. Some were calling it her most daring shoot ever, others said she crossed a line. But while millions were double-tapping and hyping her up, there was one person everyone was watching closely. Rocky. At first, everything seemed normal. No reaction. No drama. Just silence. And that silence? It made things worse. Because within hours, rumors exploded out of nowhere claiming Rocky had completely lost it behind closed doors. Words like angry, furious, even out of control started trending. And then came the headline that changed everything. Rihanna had enough. People began connecting dots that didn't even exist. They brought up past cheating rumors, old interviews, even moments from years ago that suddenly felt suspicious. The narrative started building itself, and fast. Fans weren't just watching anymore, they were picking sides. Was Rocky trying to control her? Did he feel disrespected? Or was this the moment Rihanna finally decided she wasn't going to hold back for anyone anymore? But here's where it gets crazy, because just when it looked like everything was falling apart, new details started leaking that didn't match the story at all. In fact, what Rocky allegedly said behind the scenes, and what he showed publicly, might completely flip everything you thought you knew about this situation. So now the question isn't just whether Rihanna left, it's why this story blew up the way it did. Was this really about a relationship breaking point? Or is there something deeper going on that nobody is paying attention to? Because if you think this is just about lingerie photos, you're already missing the real story. And what comes next might completely change how you see both of them, forever. Before this moment exploded into headlines and heated debates, the story of Rihanna and A$AP Rocky was never just a simple celebrity romance, it was something that had been building quietly for years, long before the world decided to turn it into drama. A lot of people forget that these two didn't just meet and instantly fall in love. Their connection goes all the way back to the early 2010s, when they first crossed paths in the music and fashion world. At that time, it was chemistry, undeniable, but not fully realized. They worked together, performed together, and were constantly seen around each other, but timing never seemed to be on their side. Rihanna was navigating high-profile relationships, while Rocky was living his own fast-paced lifestyle, making bold statements about how he viewed love and commitment. And that's where things get interesting, because back then, Rocky wasn't exactly the settle-down type. He openly talked about not believing in traditional relationships, even suggesting he could see himself with multiple partners at once. That was his mindset. That was his brand. So when things eventually shifted between him and Rihanna, it wasn't just a relationship forming, it was a transformation that people didn't fully understand at the time. Fast forward to 2020, when the world slowed down, everything changed. During that period, Rihanna and Rocky found themselves spending more time together, away from the noise, away from the cameras, and something clicked. What started as a long-standing friendship suddenly turned into something deeper. And unlike the chaos that usually surrounds celebrity couples, this felt different. More grounded. More real. By 2021, Rocky made it clear to the world how serious things had become. He didn't just call Rihanna his partner, he called her the love of his life. And for someone who had previously avoided labels and commitment, that statement alone told you everything you needed to know. This wasn't casual. This wasn't temporary. This was something he saw lasting. Then came the next phase, family. In 2022, Rihanna stepped into a completely new chapter of her life, motherhood. It wasn't just a personal milestone, it reshaped how the public saw her. She wasn't just the global superstar, the fashion icon, the business mogul anymore, she was a mother building a life with someone she trusted. And by 2023, with another child added to the picture, their bond seemed even stronger. From the outside, it looked like they had built something solid, something that could withstand the pressure of fame. But here's the reality about relationships in the spotlight: no matter how strong they appear, the internet will always try to find cracks. And with Rihanna and Rocky, those cracks were constantly being invented. One of the earliest major controversies hit in 2022, when rumors suddenly surfaced claiming Rocky had cheated. The story spread like wildfire, dragging in names, accusations, and speculation that felt way too personal to be real. Within hours, social media had already decided what happened. But just as quickly as the rumors exploded, they were shut down, denied, debunked, proven false. Yet somehow, the damage lingered. Because once a narrative is introduced online, it never fully disappears. Then came more noise, more claims, more speculation. At one point, even outside voices tried to insert themselves into their relationship, making bold accusations with zero proof. And each time, the same cycle repeated: shock, outrage, denial, and then silence. But even when the truth came out, the internet didn't really move on. It just stored those rumors, waiting for the next moment to bring them back. And that's exactly what happened with these lingerie photos. But before we even get to that, you have to understand what those photos actually represent. Because to the average person scrolling online, it might look like just another bold celebrity post. But for Rihanna, it's much bigger than that. She's not just modeling lingerie, she owns the brand behind it. Savage X Fenty isn't a side project or a casual endorsement deal, it's a billion-dollar empire. Everything she posts, every campaign she leads, every photo shoot she participates in, it's calculated, intentional, and directly tied to her business. She's built a reputation around confidence, self-expression, and breaking traditional expectations, especially when it comes to how women present themselves. So when she posts something bold, it's not random. It's strategy. And that's why this situation becomes so complicated, because now you have two narratives colliding. On one side, you have Rihanna, the businesswoman, the mogul, the woman who built her brand on empowerment and independence. Someone who has never been known to hold back or shrink herself for anyone. On the other side, you have Rocky, the partner, the father, the man who publicly transformed his views on love because of her. Someone who, by all accounts, has supported her career, her choices, and her identity. So when those photos dropped, it wasn't just about how they looked, it was about what people assumed they meant. The internet didn't see a business move, it saw a relationship test. Suddenly, everything from the past came rushing back into the conversation. Old rumors resurfaced. Past interviews were reanalyzed. Even moments that once seemed harmless were now being viewed through a completely different lens. And the question that started taking over wasn't, do the photos look good? It was, how does Rocky feel about this? And that question alone was enough to ignite everything. Because once people start questioning a relationship publicly, it doesn't stay a question for long, it becomes a storyline. And in this case, that storyline escalated faster than anyone could control. But here's where things take a turn, because while the internet was busy building this narrative, there were already signs that something didn't quite add up. Small details. Subtle reactions. Moments that didn't match the chaos being pushed online. And if you were paying close attention, you'd realize that this entire situation might not be what it looks like at all. Because sometimes, the biggest stories aren't built on truth, they are built on what people want to believe. And what happens next is where everything starts to shift in a way nobody expected. Everything truly detonated the moment the rumors stopped being whispers and turned into full-blown, insider reports. What started as speculation suddenly sounded official. Posts began circulating claiming that ASAP Rocky didn't just feel uncomfortable with Rihanna's lingerie photos, he had completely lost control over it. And that's when the narrative shifted from curiosity to conflict. According to viral posts, Rocky allegedly confronted Rihanna behind closed doors. The claims painted a very specific picture: raised voices, tension, and a man who felt like boundaries had been crossed. Words like disrespect, too far, and not appropriate for a mother started getting attached to his name. And just like that, the internet locked onto a storyline that felt explosive enough to believe. But here's the thing, none of it was confirmed. No interview. No statement. No direct source. Just a chain reaction of reposts, screenshots, and anonymous insiders that nobody could verify. Yet somehow, it didn't matter. Because once the idea was out there, people started building on it. Fans began dissecting Rihanna's photos in a completely different way. What was originally seen as bold and empowering suddenly became controversial. People weren't just reacting to the visuals anymore, they were reacting to what they thought those visuals meant for her relationship. And the more they talked, the more intense it became. Then came the next wave. Old clips resurfaced of Rocky talking about relationships, clips where he spoke openly about not believing in traditional monogamy, about wanting freedom, about his past mindset. Suddenly, those statements were being flipped and used against him. People were asking, wait, so he can say things like that, but Rihanna can't post photos? The double standard conversation exploded overnight. At the same time, another group took the opposite stance. They argued that this wasn't about control, it was about respect. That things change when you have a family. That there are lines you don't cross once you're in a committed relationship with kids involved. And just like that, the internet wasn't just watching anymore, it was divided. Two sides. Two completely different interpretations of the same situation. And right in the middle of it, silence. Neither Rihanna nor Rocky immediately addressed the rumors. No clarification. No denial. Nothing. And that silence? It became fuel. Because when high-profile couples don't respond, people assume the worst. Then something even more unexpected happened. A single post, just one, started going viral at a speed nobody could control. It claimed that Rihanna had officially walked away. No details. No explanation. Just a bold statement that she had finally had enough. Within hours, that post had millions of views. Screenshots were everywhere. Blogs picked it up. Reaction videos started flooding in. And now, the story wasn't just about a disagreement. It was about a breakup. People began connecting dots that didn't even exist. They pointed out that Rihanna hadn't posted Rocky recently. They analyzed her captions, her tone, even the timing of her uploads. Every tiny detail was treated like evidence. And the more people searched for clues, the more convinced they became that something serious had happened. But here's where the tension reaches its peak, because just when it seemed like the breakup narrative was locked in, contradictions started appearing. Some sources claimed Rihanna was completely unbothered. Others insisted she was furious. A few even suggested that the entire situation had been blown out of proportion from the start. The story was no longer consistent. It was fractured, messy, and filled with gaps. And that's when the first real twist began to surface. Because while the internet was busy pushing the idea that Rocky had gone crazy, there were no actual signs of him behaving that way publicly. No angry interviews. No cryptic posts. No visible frustration. In fact, the more people looked for evidence, the less they could find. Which raised a very uncomfortable question. If this really happened, where's the proof? That question didn't slow things down, it made people dig deeper. And what they started finding didn't match the viral narrative at all. Instead of confirming the chaos, it began exposing how quickly the story had been constructed. One key detail changed everything. On the same day the photos went viral, Rocky was reportedly asked about Rihanna's shoot. And instead of reacting with anger or frustration, his response was calm, almost dismissive of the entire controversy. He made it clear that what Rihanna chooses to do is her decision. No control. No tension. No drama. But by the time that response started circulating, it was already too late. Because the internet had already decided what it wanted to believe. And that's what makes this moment so dangerous. Not just for them, but for any public figure. Because once a narrative gains momentum, facts don't always catch up fast enough to stop it. People don't share corrections the same way they share drama. They don't amplify calm responses the same way they amplify chaos. So even as pieces of the truth started coming out, the louder story remained the same. Rocky went crazy. Rihanna left. Relationship over. And yet, behind all that noise, something wasn't adding up. Because if this was really the breaking point, why did everything look so normal just hours before? Why were there no signs leading up to it? No tension. No distance. No cracks that anyone could point to before this moment. It didn't make sense. And when a story doesn't make sense, it usually means one thing. There's something missing. Something the internet either ignored or never had in the first place. And as more details slowly started to surface, it became clear that this situation wasn't just about a photo shoot, or a reaction, or even a relationship at all. It was about how fast a lie can spread when people are ready to believe it. But the deeper you go into what actually happened next, the more shocking the truth becomes. Because the next twist doesn't just challenge the rumors. It completely flips the entire story on its head. Just when it seemed like the narrative couldn't get any bigger, it exploded again, but this time, in a completely different direction. Because while the internet was busy pushing the idea that ASAP Rocky had lost control over Rihanna's photos, a deeper layer of the story started surfacing, and it didn't just weaken the rumor, it started tearing it apart piece by piece. At first, it was subtle. A few smaller pages began pointing out inconsistencies. They questioned where the original claims even came from. No credible outlet had confirmed anything. No direct quotes. No verified insiders. Just reposted captions and dramatic headlines being recycled over and over again until they sounded real. And once people started tracing the source, things got uncomfortable fast. Because the entire Rocky went crazy storyline didn't come from an interview, or a press statement, or even a reputable leak. It came from a satirical account. And that's when everything started to shift. The same account that pushed the breakup narrative had a history of posting exaggerated, misleading, and sometimes completely fabricated celebrity drama. But by the time that detail came out, millions of people had already seen the claim, shared it, reacted to it, and built entire opinions around it. And here's the part that really flipped everything upside down. That same source had also posted Rocky's real reaction. But nobody paid attention to that. Because the real reaction wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It didn't spark outrage or debate. It was calm, simple, and almost too normal to go viral. While the fake story spread like wildfire, the truth barely moved. And that's where the situation becomes something much bigger than just Rihanna and Rocky. Because what was happening in real time wasn't just gossip, it was a perfect example of how narratives are manufactured. Think about it. Within hours, the internet took a photo shoot, something Rihanna has done countless times for her brand, and turned it into a relationship crisis. People weren't reacting to facts, they were reacting to a version of the story that felt more entertaining. And once that version took hold, everything else got ignored. Even when actual details started emerging, they didn't carry the same weight. Because by then, people weren't looking for truth anymore, they were looking for confirmation. And the deeper you look into Rihanna's situation, the more obvious that becomes. This isn't the first time her relationship has been dragged into chaos over nothing. Back in 2022, similar rumors exploded claiming Rocky had cheated. That story spread just as fast, pulled in names, created outrage, and dominated timelines. But within a day, it was debunked. Completely false. Yet somehow, it never fully disappeared. It stayed in the background, waiting for another moment like this to resurface. And then it happened again. More accusations. More speculation. Even outside figures tried to insert themselves into the narrative, throwing out claims with zero proof. Every single time, the same pattern repeated: shock, viral spread, denial, and then silence. But here's what makes this moment different. This time, the rumor wasn't just about cheating or speculation, it was about control, respect, and the idea that Rocky couldn't handle Rihanna being herself. And that's where the real tension comes in. Because if you actually look at Rihanna's career, nothing about these photos is new. She's been modeling her own lingerie for years. It's part of her brand. It's part of her business strategy. Every campaign she leads, every image she posts, it's all connected to something much bigger than just social media attention. She's not just posting photos. She's running an empire. Savage X Fenty isn't a side hustle, it's one of the biggest parts of her billion-dollar success. When she drops a campaign, it's not random. It's timed. It's strategic. It's designed to dominate conversations and drive attention exactly the way this did. And ironically, the controversy only made it bigger. Because while people were debating her relationship, they were also talking about the brand. Sharing the photos. Boosting engagement. Turning a marketing move into a viral moment that reached far beyond fashion audiences. So now you have to ask yourself, was this really a relationship problem, or was it a perfect storm of timing, attention, and internet behavior? Because once that question enters the conversation, everything starts to look different. Especially when you look at Rocky's actual behavior. Instead of anger, there was support. Instead of frustration, there was understanding. He didn't try to control the narrative. He didn't push back aggressively. He didn't feed into the drama at all. And that silence that once fueled the rumors? It now started to feel intentional. Like he understood something the internet didn't. And then came the moment that truly shattered the entire storyline. When Rocky finally addressed the situation, even briefly, his response didn't match the chaos at all. It was simple, direct, and completely at odds with the viral narrative. He made it clear that Rihanna's choices are hers. No ownership. No restrictions. No issue. And just like that, the "he went crazy" narrative collapsed. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. Even after that, the rumors didn't stop. Because by that point, the story had already taken on a life of its own. People who had already chosen a side didn't suddenly change their minds. Some ignored the new information completely. Others questioned whether his response was real. And a few doubled down, claiming there was still something being hidden behind the scenes. And that's when it became clear. This was never really about the photos. It was about perception. The internet had already created a version of Rihanna and Rocky's relationship that fit a certain storyline, one filled with tension, control, and inevitable conflict. And when reality didn't match that version, it didn't matter. Because the narrative was more entertaining than the truth. And that's the real shocking reveal. Not that Rihanna left, not that Rocky went crazy, but that none of it needed to be true for millions of people to believe it anyway. Because in today's world, the story that spreads the fastest isn't the most accurate one. It's the one that feels the most dramatic. And what happens next doesn't just expose this situation even more. It shows how the public, and even the industry, reacts when the truth finally starts catching up to the lie. By the time the truth started catching up to the story, the reaction had already split into something way bigger than just a rumor. It turned into a full-blown cultural debate, and everyone had something to say about Rihanna and A$AP Rocky. At first, the public reaction followed the same pattern you'd expect from any viral controversy: shock, outrage, and instant judgment. Social media feeds were flooded with opinions, and the loudest voices were the ones pushing the most dramatic version of events. Some users were convinced this was the breaking point, claiming that Rihanna had finally drawn a line and walked away. Others painted Rocky as insecure, accusing him of not being able to handle the very image Rihanna had built her entire empire on. And then came the opposite side. A large group of fans immediately pushed back against that narrative. They pointed out that Rihanna has always been unapologetic about her image, her brand, and her choices. For them, the idea that she would suddenly change because of a relationship didn't make sense. They defended her right to express herself, especially as someone who literally owns the brand she's promoting. In their eyes, this wasn't controversy, it was consistency. But what made things even more intense was how quickly the conversation shifted from "what happened" to "what it means." Suddenly, People weren't just talking about Rihanna and Rocky anymore, they were debating relationships, boundaries, and expectations in the public eye. Questions started trending. Should things change once you have a family? Does being in a committed relationship come with limitations? Is public expression different when millions are watching? And just like that, a single photo shoot turned into a much larger conversation about modern relationships. Meanwhile, entertainment blogs and media outlets did what they always do: they amplified the noise. Headlines leaned heavily into the drama, often repeating the same unverified claims because they generated clicks. Phrases like "Rocky furious" and "Rihanna done" kept appearing even when there was no solid evidence to support them. The more emotional the headline, the faster it spread. And that's where things started to get messy. Because even as more accurate information began to surface, it didn't travel nearly as far as the original rumors. Corrections rarely do. By the time some outlets started clarifying that there was no confirmed breakup, millions had already internalized the earlier version of the story. And in the world of viral content, perception moves faster than truth. But the most interesting reactions didn't come from random users or blogs. They came from people inside the industry. Fashion insiders, in particular, saw the situation very differently. To them, Rihanna's photos weren't controversial at all, they were strategic. They recognized exactly what she was doing: creating buzz, dominating conversation, and positioning her brand right at the center of attention heading into a major season. From a business perspective, this wasn't a mistake, it was a masterclass. Some even pointed out that the backlash itself was part of the impact. Every repost, every debate, every argument, it all fed into the visibility of her brand. Whether people loved the photos or criticized them, they were still talking about them. And in a crowded market, attention is everything. On the music side, the reactions were quieter but still telling. Artists and insiders who understood the pressure of public relationships didn't rush to judge. Instead, there was a noticeable hesitation, almost like they recognized how quickly narratives can spin out of control. For those who've been through similar situations, this wasn't surprising, it was familiar. And then there were the fans who started noticing something important. As more clips and quotes from Rocky began circulating, especially his calm, supportive stance, the tone of the conversation slowly began to shift. Not everywhere, not all at once, but enough to create cracks in the original narrative. People started questioning why they believed the rumors so quickly. Others began calling out the source of the misinformation, pointing out how easily it had spread without verification. But even with that shift, the damage had already been done. Because in viral culture, first impressions stick. For many, the image of conflict had already been created. And even when it was challenged, it didn't fully disappear. Some continued to believe there was more going on behind the scenes. Others treated the situation like a mystery that hadn't been fully solved yet. The story refused to settle completely, even when facts were introduced. And that's what makes this reaction phase so powerful. It shows how a narrative can evolve beyond its original claim. What started as a simple rumor turned into multiple versions of the same story, each one shaped by the person telling it. Some saw empowerment. Some saw disrespect. Some saw business strategy. And others saw relationship tension that may not have existed at all. But through all of it, one thing remained constant. Rihanna and Rocky themselves never fed the chaos. No dramatic statements. No public arguments. No attempts to control the conversation. While the world debated their relationship, they stayed largely silent, letting the noise play out on its own. And that silence, once again, became part of the story. Because now people were asking a different question. If things were really falling apart, wouldn't we see it? And that question started to change everything. Slowly, the focus began shifting away from the rumors and back toward reality. The lack of real conflict, the absence of evidence, and the consistency in their public behavior all pointed in the same direction. But by then, the situation had already revealed something much bigger than just a celebrity rumor. It exposed how quickly public opinion can form, and how hard it is to reverse once it does. And as the reactions continued to evolve, One final piece of the story was about to come into focus, one that doesn't just wrap everything up, but leaves you questioning whether this was ever about a breakup at all, or something much more calculated from the very beginning. Just when it looked like the story had finally settled, like the rumors had burned out and the truth had quietly taken over, something else started happening that didn't quite make sense. Because if this was really just a fake narrative, if Rihanna never left ASAP Rocky, if there was no real conflict behind the scenes, then why did this moment feel so different from all the other rumors they've faced before? That's the part nobody was paying attention to. See, this wasn't the first time their relationship had been dragged into chaos. They've dealt with cheating allegations, outside accusations, even real-life danger, and every single time, they came out stronger. No hesitation. No confusion. Just unity. But this time, the reaction wasn't as immediate. The silence lasted longer. And for a couple that's usually very clear in how they support each other publicly, that delay stood out. At first, people ignored it. They focused on the headlines, the drama, the viral posts. But once everything started slowing down, once the noise faded just enough, that silence became impossible to ignore. Because in a world where everything is documented, posted, and shared in real time, silence isn't empty. It means something. And that's where the final twist begins to take shape. Because while the internet was busy arguing over whether Rocky lost it, a different question started creeping in. What if this wasn't about losing control at all? What if this was about control in a completely different way? Think about the timing. Rihanna drops one of her most talked about campaigns right as the world is already watching her closely. Within hours, the conversation explodes, not just about the photos, but about her relationship, her choices, her identity. The engagement goes through the roof. The brand dominates headlines. Everyone is talking. And then? Nothing. No dramatic denial. No emotional response. No attempt to shut it down immediately. Just enough silence to let it grow. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because if you look at it from a different angle, this entire situation starts to look less like a random controversy, and more like something that was allowed to happen. Not necessarily planned, but definitely not stopped. Because Rihanna understands attention better than almost anyone in the industry. She knows how narratives work. She knows how fast things spread. And more importantly, she knows that controversy, even false controversy, can amplify everything. So the question becomes, did she let the moment play out on purpose? Not the rumors themselves, but the reaction to them. Because every headline, every debate, every viral post, even the negative ones, kept her exactly where she needed to be. At the center of the conversation. And then there's Rocky. Because while everyone was expecting anger, jealousy, or some kind of reaction that would confirm the drama, he did the exact opposite. Calm. Controlled. Almost detached from the chaos. And that kind of response? It doesn't just happen by accident. Especially not when the entire internet is trying to pull you into a narrative. So now you have two people at the center of one of the biggest viral moments of the week, and neither of them is behaving the way the story says they should. No breakdown. No confrontation. No visible cracks. Just control. And that's what makes this situation feel unfinished. Because if this really was just a fake rumor that got out of hand, it would have died the moment the truth came out. But it didn't. It lingered. It kept evolving. It kept people questioning whether there was something more beneath the surface. And maybe that's the real twist. Not that Rihanna left. Not that Rocky went crazy. But that the entire situation revealed how powerful perception really is, and how easily it can be shaped, redirected, or even used. Because in the end, people didn't just react to what happened. They reacted to what they thought was happening. And that difference? It changes everything. But here's the part that still doesn't sit right. Even after the truth started coming out, even after the narrative was challenged, there are still people convinced that something happened behind closed doors that we're not seeing. And maybe that's just the nature of celebrity culture. Or maybe it's a sign that this story isn't completely over yet. Because moments like this don't just disappear. They leave traces. They create questions. And sometimes, those questions come back when you least expect them. So now you have to ask yourself, was this really just another viral misunderstanding that got out of control? Or was this the beginning of something bigger, something that hasn't fully revealed itself yet? Because if history has taught us anything about stories like this, it's that the final chapter usually comes when everyone thinks it's already over. And if that's the case, then what happens next might be the part nobody saw coming. So now it's your turn to decide what you really believe, because after everything you've just seen, one thing is clear, this situation isn't as simple as the headlines made it seem. Did Rihanna actually walk away from A$AP Rocky, or did the internet once again take a single moment and turn it into something it was never supposed to be? Drop your opinion in the comments right now. I want to know, do you think there was real tension behind the scenes, or was this just another viral narrative that got way out of control? And don't just scroll past this, because your perspective matters here. The way stories like this spread depends on what people choose to believe and share. So if you think the truth is being ignored, say it. If you think there's still more to uncover, call it out. Also, if you made it this far, you already know this story had way more layers than people were talking about. From the photos, to the rumors, to the reaction, and then the twist that flipped everything, this wasn't just drama, this was a full breakdown of how fast things can spiral when the spotlight hits. Make sure you hit that like button if you want more breakdowns like this, because there are stories dropping every single day that people aren't seeing clearly, and we're going to keep exposing all of it. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next, because if you think this situation was wild, the next one might be even crazier. And before you go, ask yourself one last question. If something this big can be created out of almost nothing, then how many other stories are we believing right now that aren't actually real? Stay locked in, because the next upload might just change everything you thought you knew.